Good morning. I'm Mark Allen with Gaber.io, and I'm here today with Christine Hong, the CEO and founder of Apothecary. Good morning, Christine. How you doing?
Good morning, Mark. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us today on this beautiful day in Northern California. Another beautiful day, right?
Absolutely.
Yes. So to start with, can you give us a brief description of yourself and your work experience?
Yeah, absolutely. So I graduated last year from Harvard. I studied neurobiology and I come from a family of doctors. So
Hmm.
my entire life, I thought I would be one myself. And much to my entire family of doctors' dismay, I decided to move cross country to San Francisco to start Apothecary, my skincare company. And that was really because, it was born out of my personal experiences and frustrations with my own skin problems, including eczema and acne. And having a dermatologist mom, I think that's something that she could
Hmm.
get behind.
And, and neurobiology, I have to ask you, that sounds like more study of the brain. Is that correct?
Yeah, I've always been really fascinated by the human experience and how that is rooted in our biology. And so neurobiology was really an interest of mine in college, and I really wanted to be a neurosurgeon.
Hmm.
And we know how that turned out.
You know what? I think you chose. You have actually you might have a better calling. It sounds like a really positive thing you're doing. So tell us about Apothecary. You told us why. Now tell us what you guys do. Who's your target audience? All that stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Apothecary is a next gen retailer for beauty. And it's really out of this insight that consumers are discovering and shopping for beauty products differently. 70% of Gen Z buys products they discover through creators, not in store. And so, whereas in the previous generation, we typically went into Sephora and asked for recommendations or department store counters and tried things. Now we're seeing a huge shift in consumer behavior where the younger generation really trusts beauty content creators and goes to people on YouTube and Instagram and TikTok for honest recommendations. So we're kind of capturing that behavior change and going with the digital first personalized discovery online.
Wow, that's really cool. And do you foresee yourself someday selling in a Sephora, or are you going to stay online? You think?
Yeah, I think definitely, this is a really competitive space. So we have to be really strategic about how we get our foot in the door. And so it makes a lot of sense to definitely focus on digital first because that's where right now you go to Sephora.com and there are just pages and pages of products and it's impossible to sort through and figure out what will actually work for you. So I think that is our first strategic approach, and our go-to-market strategy is heavily around the creator and empowering them to start monetizing off of their existing social media channels. So for us, it makes sense to go digital first and possibly for the first few years, but never say never when it comes to in-store retail.
Yeah, that would be true. So you told me you started the company about 6 months ago, right? I mean, so you started in the middle of a pandemic. And do you think that helped you or do you think that hurt you? I mean, in the short run, not the long run is still to be determined.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, a lot of businesses have been impacted by the aftermath of COVID, that's for sure. Some industries have suffered a lot more than others. I think for us, we ended up being really lucky that there was a big spike in skincare post COVID. People stay at home and they're much more invested in self care. It's much less emphasis on makeup and covering things up, and more on how do I feel great about myself at home and take care of myself. And so skincare saw a huge spike post COVID. And so I think for us, we were very fortunate that it didn't completely demolish our industry the way it did others.
Hmm.
Yeah, and I think it also shifted, previously before COVID, we only had about 15% e-commerce penetration for beauty. And post COVID, it's about 70%.
Really, it jumped that much in one pandemic, for lack of a better
Right,
term.
right. Well, before people were going into Sephora and trying the textures in person and seeing if they liked it or not. But after the pandemic, it's not so safe anymore.
True. And then So do you have things online that help people see what it will look like for them, or is it they order it and try it, and if they like it, they keep it. If not, they send it back.
Yeah, so I think with color cosmetics, it matters much more. Like Sephora and Ulta are investing into AR technologies that kind of show like what would this foundation look like on your skin, and there's a lot of technology around that. For skincare, it's much more. I think there's a greater need around how can we test it. It's much less about how does it look and much more about how does it feel. So brands are looking for new ways to reach and sample consumers at home because they
Mhm.
can no longer have that in-store experience. And so that's something else that we're exploring with them is how can we get them like a month-long supply to sample products at home. It takes about 2 weeks to a month to see how a skincare product works on your skin. And so kind of reinventing the model around sampling is also something we're exploring.
Oh, very cool. And I know that your website ends in .ai, so I'm assuming you apply some artificial intelligence to this.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So, in the very first version of our product, I was creating a service basically for a consumer exactly like me. And that's someone who's very like quantitatively driven. I much more trust an algorithm that, can give me product recommendations of upwards of 90% accuracy
Mhm.
than like a person. But then we asked our users point blank, would you rather have this algorithm give you recommendations or a real person giving you recommendations from their personal experiences? And the overwhelming majority of our users that we interviewed actually said the latter. So we had to shift from that data driven approach more to a community powered approach, which I can talk more about our creator community and the storefront model there. But definitely in the very beginning and early days, we still have a vestigial skin quiz available on our site. We still take 170,000 reviews into consideration when giving product recommendations through that channel, but now much more focused on the community storefronts.
Wow, that's fascinating. And the other thing is you said you graduated recently. So did you graduate during COVID also?
No, I graduated about a year ago,
Okay, so
right
you
before.
you got in right at the end, right
Yeah,
before everyone had to go remote, right?
yeah, we got the last in-person graduation.
Really?
Yep.
So, and then you started Apothecary. You obviously started as a remote company, right? I'm assuming you're in the Bay Area, and you have other employees in other parts of the country or world.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So we have Jason, who is our tech lead, and Elton, and they're both based in Canada.
Oh,
Uh, yeah, and our advisors are scattered across the country as well, and we uh, work with a part-time team based in the Philippines. So really distributed.
wow, very distributed. Yeah, and you had no choice but to start as a remote company. So once everything goes back to normal, do you see yourself staying remote, or do you think you'll eventually have an office and a place for people to come in and work?
Yeah, we really want to have an office based in San Francisco, and that's because although we are taking more of a community-powered approach now, skincare is a category that can be personalized using data, and we do want to be in an area thinking long term that has readily accessible talent
Mhm.
for data engineering, because at the core, we want our DNA to be data driven.
Okay, so you're going to stay data driven, but listening to the customer for now, right? And I would
Exactly.
assume for good.
Yeah, and SF is so close to LA too, which is one of the big hubs for beauty. So it makes a lot of sense.
Yes, I've done that trip many times. I've been down there in the morning and flown home at night. It's not that big a deal. It's just a
Yeah,
longer commute to work. Although
exactly.
before COVID, the commutes to work could get pretty long. So that's what you haven't experienced that yet, have you? You haven't experienced the San Francisco traffic, have you?
No, not really.
Yeah, I can
It's a
tell
big
you.
city though.
It's what?
It's
Pardon?
a big city, a lot bigger than Boston.
Yes, it is. Well, it's a big, the whole area. I mean, it's, San Francisco, Oakland, and San Jose, as you know. It,
Yeah.
and you and I are probably 30 minutes apart, 45 minutes apart, but during traffic, it's more like an hour and a half, just so you know.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh,
And
So
the
final question is, you're a remote company. You're going to go back. You're going to go to a more traditional model with some remote. But what do you think is the future of remote work in general? And will you continue to use remote employees?
Yeah, I think you know, COVID has shifted our understanding of what works and what has to work, and we've kind of had to push that envelope. And we've seen that it is totally fine if people stay at home to work. And
Mhm.
so I think there's going to be a shift there in terms of in the past. I know there was a lot of um, you talk to investors and they would prefer if your team was fully based in one city together, and now they don't care as much. And so I think it has much like in the consumer side of things, um, they might be purchasing online rather than in store for a long time, and it might not normalize even for years. I
Mhm.
think talent is so expensive in San Francisco, and people are finding much more cost efficient ways to build their companies, fully distributed teams. And there have been some IPOs with fully distributed teams. So I think there's definitely going to be more openness to that.
Yes. Well, Christine, it's interesting to talk to someone like you who has a degree in such a neurobiology is so technical, and so it's not the typical thing you hear. And then you decided to go 100%, not 100%, but do something totally different and follow your passion, and that is commendable. So I wish you all the luck in the world. I hopefully Apothecary becomes a household name in the beauty industry.
Thank you so much, Mark.
Right. Have a great week.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.